Hello and welcome, crack souls of the internet, to Real Reddit Horror, the series where I read horror stories from Redditors that they swear are true. In this episode, I have 3 insane stories for all of you, so let's dive right into the realm of horror. In the Woods, from Kabuzig 1. So, this story has already reached its conclusion, I think. Me and my now wife moved to some land I inherited in the boonies of Oklahoma. We love it here, and in the past year, we got a manufactured home. For the first 2 years, we lived in a small, converted shop. We made it like a small barn dominium. We moved in 2020 around December. Shortly after we moved in, I put a small fence around the shop so we could get a dog. While working on the fence listening to headphones, I hear what sounds like a woman moan from the woods. Half the property is forested, with the shop being on the perimeter of the trees. Over the next couple months, I hear the same noise several times, usually when I'm outside doing work, often close to the evening. But then I hear it while inside the shop. It always comes from the woods. So I tell my now wife, who at the time said she had never heard it. But after a couple weeks, she calls me while I'm working and says she finally heard it. Over the next year or so, we hear it every so often, a couple times while together. Sometimes I would grab my gun and go outside and look around the shop and find nothing. Fast forward to early 2021, my wife's best friend comes over and is hanging out at the house waiting for my wife to get off work. We are best friends with her and her husband. Me and her are talking and catching up, and I hear my great Pioneese losing his mind outside. It's like 10 at night. Now, we got the dog a few months prior after our first batch of chickens were killed by raccoons. He's a great dog and has free range of the property. This breed of dog barks at everything, but I can normally tell when it's about something serious, and I have never even to this day heard him like this again. We go outside with a cheap flashlight. He is staring at something in the distance, like 40 to 50 feet away, and when he sees us, he panics. He gets in front of me and tries to get me to back up. The light we had showed eye shine maybe 2.5 to 3 feet off of the ground. I run back inside to get my better light and a gun. Why I didn't grab them beforehand, I don't know, and go back to where the dog and friend were. This light is dang near a spotlight, and I shine the property up, and nothing. Next day I go to where we saw it and see no footprints. The friend said she didn't hear it run off either. Where we saw the eyes, it was maybe 30 feet from the tree line. So after this incident, we are still hearing the noise. That fall, we have a calf born. After a week or so, they disappear. The mother is freaking out, going from one end of the property to the other, crying. Me, my wife, and neighbors search our property and surrounding properties, but are unable to find the calf. No signs of what happened. A few months pass and we stop hearing the moaning. My neighbor in passing goes, "Oh, by the way, the man who lives north of me shot a big cat around the time your calf went missing. Apparently they were bigger than a bobcat with a long tail, aka a mountain lion. Since around that time I heard no more weird noises. Crazy to think I was out in the woods on countless occasions with a possible mountain lion hanging around my property, including walking to a deer stand in the dark. This might be more anticlimactic, but we spent nearly 2 years thinking we had a ghost. Lol." I didn't know where the story was going to go in the beginning. When Kabu said that he heard moaning in the woods, I assumed 2 horny-ass teenagers were just fucking around. Literally. But no, the sounds were coming from a mountain lion. Now, right after I finished reading the story, I googled, "Do mountain lions moan?" And I learned that they can make a high-pitched scream that sounds like a human woman screaming. And since Kabu stopped hearing the moaning sounds after the mountain lion was shot, we can only assume that the animal was the culprit behind the sounds. The scariest day of a father's life, from Dapper_Gear 3559. Longtime lurker, first time poster. I've never had anything really supernatural happen to me, but I read a post here and it made me realize this was the scariest day of my life. I've blocked a lot of it out of my memory to try to deal with it. and because it all happened so fast, some parts are hard to remember. So the details may be a bit sketchy, but I'll do my best to give the information I do remember and fill in the blanks with my best storytelling. It was the summer of 2018, and I was still with my now ex-wife. My daughter was 4 at the time. Technically speaking, she was my stepdaughter, but sperm donor, as my ex called him, is no longer in the picture, and I'm dad. I currently am a legal guardian for school reasons, and I'm hoping to adopt soon, but that's probably a post for a different subreddit, and I digress. My ex had a good friend, one of her best friends who lived in the country. Lake, pool, camper, trampoline, fire pit, lots of acreage, golf cart to get around. She even had a daughter that was just about the same age as ours. Being a Boy Scout growing up and having just bought a new tent, we decided, let's go set up the new tent, test it out, and have a fun evening. It was a long drive, as we live in the city in a bordering state, both households close to state lines, but still long enough that my ex had said or done something to upset me during the drive. I know that seems unimportant, but it comes into play with what happened. We get to the friend's house, and of course, the first thing these 4-year-old girls want to do is go swimming in the above-ground pool. Sure, they aren't deep, but 4-year-olds aren't very tall. Their moms wanted to catch up. The friend got her daughter's floaties on. However, in the catching up / changing into their suits, my ex did not get our daughter's floaties on, but did get our daughter into her suit. I, being upset at the time, cracked open one of the beers I had brought with me and started setting up the tent on my own. Not even 10 minutes later, I hear a scream from my ex's friend. She said she heard her daughter say my daughter isn't breathing from the garage, near the pool, and they had a changing room inside. I turned and looked to see my daughter face down in this pool. My heart sank. My adrenaline kicked in. My limited knowledge of life-saving and CPR from the Boy Scouts took precedence over everything else in my mind. I knew she hadn't jumped in and hurt herself to where I needed a soft entry. None of the adults had even heard a splash. They had snuck into the pool thinking that one of the floaties would be enough to sustain them both. So I ran towards the pool, throwing my phone from my pocket and leaping over the edge. Shoes be damned. All I could think about is how long had she not been breathing? How long would it take for EMT to get here? I wish I remembered more from when I was 16 to 17 doing BSA lifeguard training. I rushed over to get her limp, lifeless body and couldn't stop the thoughts in my head. How did this happen? Why didn't I hear it? I hope she has a pulse. How do I get her out? I picked her body up. No response. I went back to the edge of the pool. I'm not even sure who I handed her off to, but I hurried to the ladder, knowing that the people screaming and terrified wouldn't be able to help, except put her on the ground and call 911. After climbing out the pool, I rushed to her, checked for breathing and a pulse. Whether it was the adrenaline or the pulse being so low, I'm not sure. I didn't feel one. Definitely no breathing. The only thought in my head was, please don't make me break your ribs to give you CPR. I checked her airway and tilted her head back. No blockage. 2 breaths into her mouth with her nose plugged. I heard the most terrified cry that I've ever heard from my daughter, but the most calming screech I've ever heard myself. She got airlifted to the hospital. It was an overnight stay to make sure there was no water in her lungs. She's alive and well, even if she does test my last nerve. By far the scariest day of my life. This is without a doubt one of the most horrifying stories I've read on this series so far. It's on par with the horrifying experience at a bus stop and an unforgettable night. That being said, you just have to imagine the sheer horror Dapper was feeling seeing his daughter face down in the pool, then having to get her airlifted to the hospital. Dapper is an absolute legend for jumping in there and getting her out immediately. He reacted faster than everyone else did, which leads me to believe that if he wasn't there, she might not have lived. My strangest scary encounter yet, from Lumpy Curveballs. I've always been a person that has weird things happen to me. It's not a matter of if something is going to happen, it's when. Because of this, I've become pretty aloof when it comes to interacting with the world, maintaining a it is what it is mentality. However, I feel like I was justified in being freaked out about this incident in particular. Not a lot actually scares me, but this is one of the few things that did. The setting was a typical scary story setting. 11:30ish at night, pitch dark outside, hardly anyone on the roads. I was freshly 18 and driving, on my way back from a 6-hour shift at work, and had pulled into a 24-hour drive-thru. I live out of town, and I knew I'd be too tired to make myself something once I got home. Plus, I was starving. Nothing out of the ordinary happened while I was getting my food. There was nobody else around, and me and the drive-thru worker seemed to be the only ones currently awake. What I assumed was his car was the only one in the parking lot, and it was parked close to the employee exit/entrance, which is almost right next to the exit of the drive-thru. I get my food, bid the guy good night, then pull into the nearest parking spot fresh out of the drive-thru, which is literally right in front of it, though there's enough space between it and the exit for a car to get by. I parked the car and began setting myself up for the drive home, unwrapping my wrap and putting my straw in my drink, the usual. Out of the corner of my eye, I see the headlights of a vehicle pull into the parking lot from the furthest entrance. Now, the fast food restaurant shares a parking lot with a vacant building that used to be a Sears, and people are free to use that as an entrance as well. I pay it no mind, figuring someone else had the same idea as me, and go back to setting myself up. For a solid minute, I'm getting myself situated before I suddenly get the feeling that I'm not alone. I look up in time to see the same vehicle pull up right next to my car, literally the next parking space over. Mind you, the parking lot is completely empty. They could have parked anywhere else, yet they chose to pull up right next to my tiny little car, which felt like an insect compared to the massive black truck they were in. In this moment, I jump into defensive mode and immediately start taking note of everything I can see about this truck. It's completely black, the back windows are tinted, but there's enough lighting that I can see the silhouettes of 2, maybe 3 passengers in the back seat. In the front seat is the driver, who is obscured by the darkness, and the passenger, whose door is almost snug up against my driver's door. He's tall and lanky, wearing a baseball hat and a face mask, one of the black pepper ones, and has a hoodie with the hood pulled over his head and hat. For a few moments, I just sat there staring, and the passenger of the truck is looking at me. I can feel it, and I'm majorly creeped out and uncomfortable, yet I'm frozen in place. The truck has pulled into park. I could hear the gear change, and saw the driver move accordingly. Me and the passenger just stared at one another through our windows. My brain was screaming at me to move, but I couldn't. My hands were still in the process of unwrapping my food. I wasn't a pretty sight. My hair was slicked back with sweat into a ponytail. My shift had absolutely wiped the floor of me, and anyone could tell just by looking at me. And I was wearing my glasses that I use when I drive, nearsighted issues and astigmatism. The longer we sat there, the louder my brain kept screaming at me to move, to do something other than sit there and stare at the guy. I've been in enough situations where I know that my fear response, unfortunately, is to freeze, and that was exactly what I had done. That was until the passenger moved. Within a few seconds, a lot happened. The passenger moved and opened his door and began the process of getting out. My body finally kicked into gear right as I heard my brain audibly tell me, "Nope, go." And I listened. I yanked the car into drive and sped right out of there, one hand still holding my wrap and the other grappling the steering wheel and swerving to get the fuck out of there. As I exited the parking lot, I looked back through the window and I saw the passenger getting back into the truck. I didn't look long enough to see if they had left or not, considering there was a traffic light coming up, but I'm assuming they did. I probably broke multiple speeding laws getting the hell out of there, but I didn't care. I immediately messaged my friend and told her what happened. I knew she'd be asleep, and then I called my boyfriend at the time, who'd been waiting for me so we could talk once I got off work. He picked up, and I told him what happened. He could tell I was serious because of the tone of my voice, and he asked if I was okay. I stayed on the phone with him the entire way back to my house, and I kept looking over my shoulder, suspicious of any headlights that might be following me. Thankfully, once I got off the highway and onto the back roads towards my house, I live on a farm, nobody was following me. I bid my boyfriend good night once I turned off the car. I got inside and ate my food, and I immediately went to bed, too tired to stress over the situation any more than I already had. When I told my mom about it in the morning, she just said, "Yeah, he was just trying to talk to you." Which, well, duh, she wasn't very sympathetic to my stress for whatever reason. So I just brushed it off and continued with my day and then my life. However, my friend that I had messaged the previous night freaked out enough for me and my mother, and she called me the second she woke up and saw my message to make sure I was okay. Even now, months later, she still mentions it whenever the topic comes up, and honestly, I'm grateful she cares as much as she does. My mom's reaction made me feel like I was overreacting, even though logically I knew I wasn't. Freeze is still my automatic fear response, and I'm doing everything I can to fix it. I'd rather not be in that position again. I don't know what those people were doing parking right next to her, but I don't think it was for any good reason. It's better that Lumpy didn't find out. This concludes episode 3 of Real Reddit Horror. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Crackso Spinner, and until the next story, I'm just in my room.